The words crashed against me like shattered glass, cutting deeper than any knife ever could. Worthless. That's what you are, Charlotte. A worthless disappointment. My father's voice boomed across the mahogany conference table as board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I stood frozen. The quarterly report I'd spent weeks preparing clutched in trembling hands, while inside me, a secret burned brighter than his rage. I owned 51% of his precious company, and he had absolutely no idea. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Charlotte Reeves. I'm 34 years old, and I spent over a decade being the obedient daughter to a man who measured love in profit margins and loyalty in sacrifices. This is the story of how I reclaimed my power from someone who never thought I deserved to have any in the first place. I didn't cry when he dismissed me from that meeting. Didn't flinch when the door slammed behind me, rattling the frosted glass with his name etched in bold. REEVES Enterprises. Victor Reeves, CEO. I walked calmly to the elevator, wrote it down 36 floors, and stepped into the September sunshine with my spine straight and my mind racing. The bustling streets of downtown Boston continued around me, unaware that beneath my perfectly pressed blazer, my heart hammered against my ribs. Business people hurried past, coffees in hand, earbuds in place, while I stood motionless, wondering how many of them lived with secrets that could bring empires crashing down. I slipped into a corner cafe, ordered a black coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant, poised on the edge of an action that would change everything. One email to the legal team I'd quietly assembled, one signature on documents I'd prepared months ago. That's all it would take. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The cafe buzzed with afternoon chatter, the scent of espresso and pastries hanging in the air. I stared at my reflection in the black mirror of my untouched coffee. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who had entered her father's company straight out of business school, eager to prove herself worthy of the Reeves name. That Charlotte had been full of hope, ambition, and a desperate need for her father's approval. This Charlotte had learned to play a different game entirely. I closed my laptop and left the cafe, coffee abandoned, as memories swirled around me like autumn leaves. I remembered my mother's warning before she died. "Your father values loyalty," she'd said, "but never forget to be loyal to yourself first." I was 12 then, too young to understand the weight behind her words. Now at 34, I carried them like armor. I walked 6 blocks to a small, unremarkable building that housed the offices of Marlowe & Associates, a financial consulting firm that existed primarily on paper. Inside, Lisa Marlowe greeted me with a knowing nod. We'd been roommates in college, before she went on to become one of the shrewdest financial strategists on the East Coast. "They still don't suspect anything?" she asked, closing the door behind me. I shook my head. "My father called me worthless in front of the entire board today." Lisa's expression hardened. "The same board that has no idea you own controlling interest in the company?" "The very same," I confirmed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 years ago, when my grandfather died, he left behind more than just a legacy. He left me shares in REEVES Enterprises, shares my father had no knowledge of. My grandfather Edmund had watched from the sidelines as his son transformed from a promising young entrepreneur into a tyrannical businessman who valued profits over people. He'd watched too as I tried repeatedly to implement more ethical practices, only to be shut down and humiliated by my father at every turn. "He'll never change, Charlotte," Grandfather had told me during our last conversation. "But the company can, under the right leadership." I hadn't understood what he meant until his lawyer contacted me after the funeral. Grandfather had spent years quietly buying back shares in the company, transferring them into a trust that would pass to me upon his death. The paperwork was meticulous, the transfers legal but deliberately obscured through a series of holding companies and trusts. With those shares combined with the small percentage I'd already owned, I held 51% of REEVES Enterprises. Controlling interest. I think it's time, Charlotte, Lisa said, pulling me back to the present. She opened a folder containing the documents we'd prepared. You don't deserve this treatment. You never have. I traced my fingers over the embossed logo on the papers. I need to be strategic. If I move too quickly, he'll find a way to fight back. He always does. Lisa nodded, understanding the caution that had been drilled into me through years of watching my father destroy anyone who challenged him. What's your plan? I smiled for the first time that day. First, we document everything. The verbal abuse, the undermining, the unethical business practices he's pushed through despite my objections. Then we gather allies, board members who've witnessed his behavior but have been too afraid to speak up. And then we call a special board meeting. One he doesn't control. I left Lisa's office with a renewed sense of purpose. My father had taught me many lessons over the years, though not the ones he'd intended. He taught me to watch silently, to notice who held real power, and how they wielded it. He'd taught me that appearances could be deceiving, and that patience was often more valuable than immediate action. Most importantly, he taught me that people rarely suspect what they don't believe possible, and Victor Reeves had never believed his daughter capable of outmaneuvering him. I returned to my apartment as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The space was minimalist, practical, a reflection of the parts of myself I'd been allowed to express. No family photos adorned the walls. No mementos from a childhood spent trying to earn scraps of affection. Instead, there were books, hundreds of them, lining built-in shelves. My true education in business, psychology, and strategy. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, then settled onto the window seat overlooking the city. Below, lights flickered on as dusk deepened into evening. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, my father was probably still working, still plotting, still completely unaware of what was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Megan, the only family member I was still close to. Heard about what happened today. You okay? Megan worked in HR at REEVES Enterprises. She was one of the few people who had witnessed my father's behavior over the years and had quietly supported me through it all. She didn't know about my majority ownership. No one did except Lisa and the lawyers. But she knew I was planning something. I'm fine, I texted back. Just another day with Victor Reeves. Her response came quickly. He's getting worse, Char. The things he's saying about you when you're not around. My stomach tightened. Tell me. He's talking about restructuring your department, saying it might be time for fresh blood at the director level. I took a deep breath. So he was planning to push me out. After 10 years of dedicated service, after I'd increased departmental efficiency by 37% and secured 3 major international clients, he was still looking for ways to prove I wasn't enough. Thanks for the heads up, I replied. Keep your ears open. I set my phone down and closed my eyes, letting the weight of the day settle around me. Part of me wanted to act immediately, to storm into his office tomorrow and reveal everything, to see the shock on his face when he realized his worthless daughter had been holding the real power all along. But that wasn't the smart play. My father hadn't built an empire by being easily defeated. He was cunning, ruthless, and had connections throughout the industry. If I moved too soon, without enough support, he would find a way to challenge the share transfers, to paint my grandfather as mentally incompetent when he'd arranged them, to drag everything through courts for years. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be patient. Most of all, I needed to be the one thing he never expected, calculating. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Daniel Harrington, a board member who had shown subtle signs of discomfort during my father's outbursts. A man with daughters of his own who sometimes looked at me with something close to paternal concern. Mr. Harrington, I wrote, I was hoping we might meet for coffee this week to discuss some concerns I have about the company's direction. I value your perspective and discretion. It was a small step, but a necessary one. Building allies would be critical in the weeks to come. I sent the email and then began reviewing the documentation I'd been secretly compiling for years. Every belittling comment in meetings. Every time he'd taken credit for my ideas. Every instance where he'd pushed ethical boundaries or created a hostile work environment. All carefully dated, with witnesses noted. The night deepened around me as I worked, the city lights blurring through the window. I thought about all the nights like this one, stretching back through the years. Nights spent trying to anticipate my father's next move, preparing defenses against criticism that would come regardless of my performance, strategizing ways to protect the employees under my direction from his worst impulses. I was tired of living defensively. It was time to take control of the narrative. My phone buzzed again. A response from Daniel Harrington. "I'd be happy to meet. How about Thursday morning at Westfields, 8 a.m.? I smiled. It was beginning. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, pearls that had belonged to my mother. The armor of someone who belonged in the corporate world, despite what my father might think. I arranged my hair in a sleek bun, applied minimal makeup, and practiced my expression in the mirror. Confident but not arrogant, approachable but professional. The mask I'd perfected over a decade of working for a man who saw weakness as an invitation to attack. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was tense. Word of my father's outburst had spread, as it always did. Colleagues offered sympathetic glances but kept their distance, fearful of being associated with someone who had fallen from favor. Only Megan stopped by my office, closing the door behind her. "He's called a directors' meeting for this afternoon," she said without preamble. I'm not supposed to know, but Marcus from his office let it slip. Marcus was my father's assistant, a nervous young man who sometimes fed Megan information out of a misplaced crush. "Any idea what it's about?" I asked, though I already suspected. Megan's expression was grim. "Restructuring. And he specifically asked for your department's performance reports." I nodded, keeping my face neutral even as my mind raced. "Thanks for the warning." After she left, I opened my desk drawer and removed a small thumb drive containing copies of all my department's true performance data, numbers that showed consistent growth and efficiency improvements under my leadership. Numbers that contradicted whatever doctored reports my father might present to justify my removal. I slipped the drive into my pocket just as my phone rang. The display showed Victor Reeves. My father calling directly instead of having his assistant summon me. That was unusual. "Charlotte," I answered, keeping my voice even. "My office. Now." He hung up without waiting for a response. I took a moment to center myself, drawing in a deep breath and releasing it slowly. Then I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked the long corridor to the executive suite, aware of the eyes following my progress. My father's office occupied the northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city and harbor beyond. It was deliberately designed to intimidate, from the oversized desk to the wall of industry awards and newspaper features chronicling his rise to power. I'd been in this room hundreds of times, but it never failed to make me feel small, which was, of course, exactly the point. He was standing at the window when I entered, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. At 62, Victor Reeves still cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that added to his air of authority. He didn't turn when I closed the door, didn't acknowledge my presence for a full 30 seconds. Another power play. Finally, he turned, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Charlotte." I remained standing, a small act of defiance but one that didn't go unnoticed. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I've been reviewing your department's numbers," he said, moving to his desk and picking up a folder. "They're disappointing, to say the least." "My department has exceeded targets for the past 6 quarters," I replied calmly. "Our client retention rate is the highest in the company." He waved a dismissive hand. "Surface metrics. I'm looking at deeper indicators of performance, efficiency, innovation, leadership potential." He fixed me with a cold stare, areas where you continue to fall short. I said nothing, waiting. My father hated silence. He filled it compulsively, often revealing more than he intended. "I've decided to bring in someone from outside to oversee your division," he continued after a moment. James Caldwell from Meridian Partners. You'll report to him effective next Monday. James Caldwell, my father's golf partner's son. A man with half my experience and twice my arrogance. I'd met him at industry events. He'd made a point of commenting on my appearance rather than my professional accomplishments. "I see," was all I said. My father's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by my lack of protest. "That's it? No argument? No tears? Would either change your decision?" He studied me for a moment, then shook his head. "You've always been too passive, Charlotte. It's why you'll never lead this company. Leadership requires fire, conviction, the willingness to fight for what you want." His voice hardened. "But then, you've never fought for anything, have you? Always taking the path of least resistance. Just like your mother." The mention of my mother sent a spike of anger through me, but I kept my expression neutral. Victoria Reeves had been anything but passive. She'd simply chosen her battles carefully, a strategy I'd inherited from her. My father had never understood the quiet strength she'd possessed, had mistaken her strategic patience for weakness. The same mistake he was making with me now. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady. He frowned, clearly disappointed by my reaction. He'd expected tears, protests, perhaps even begging, something he could use to further justify his decision to the board, to paint me as emotionally unstable and unsuited for leadership. "For now," he said coldly, "you can go." I turned and walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "You know, Dad, you've taught me a lot over the years." "Have I?" His tone was skeptical. I looked back at him, allowing myself a small smile. "More than you realize." Then I left, closing the door quietly behind me. In the hallway, I took a moment to compose myself, aware of curious glances from administrative staff who'd no doubt been straining to overhear the conversation. Then I walked back to my office, spine straight, face serene, while inside my mind was already calculating the next moves in a game my father didn't even know we were playing. The digital clock on my desk read 10:17 a.m. In less than 30 hours, I had a coffee meeting with Daniel Harrington that could change everything. Until then, I would continue the role I'd perfected, the dutiful daughter, the competent but unthreatening executive, the woman who hadn't yet realized her father was planning to replace her. It was a performance I'd delivered flawlessly for years. But soon, very soon, the real show would begin. I sat across from Daniel Harrington at Westfield's, the upscale cafe, where Boston's business elite conducted their most delicate conversations. Steam rose from my untouched cappuccino as I studied the man opposite me, silver-haired, distinguished, with kind eyes that had witnessed my humiliation in countless board meetings without intervention. Until now, perhaps. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Harrington," I began. "Daniel, please." He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I've been watching the situation with your father for some time. Yesterday's outburst wasn't isolated, was it?" "No," I admitted. "It wasn't." Daniel sighed, setting down his spoon with precision. "I served on this board with your grandfather, you know. Edmund was a different kind of leader, principled, compassionate. He built relationships, not just profits." He looked at me directly. "You remind me of him." The comparison warmed something in me that had been cold for years. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "What exactly did you want to discuss, Charlotte?" I leaned forward slightly. "I believe my father is leading the company down a problematic path, ethically and strategically. The offshore manufacturing initiative, the labor practices in our Southeast Asian facilities, the environmental corners being cut to boost quarterly returns. These aren't just moral concerns, they're long-term liabilities." Daniel nodded slowly. "Several board members share these concerns. But your father's control of the company makes opposition challenging. What if that control was more tenuous than everyone believes?" I asked carefully. His eyebrows rose. "I'm listening." "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Over the next 30 minutes, I outlined my situation without revealing my full hand. I explained that I had reason to believe there might be a way to challenge my father's leadership, but that I would need allies on the board when the time came. Daniel listened intently, asking occasional pointed questions that revealed his own sharp business acumen. "This won't be easy," he said finally. "Your father has cultivated loyalty through fear for decades. Even those who disagree with him are afraid to stand against him." "I understand the risks," I replied. "But sometimes the greater risk is doing nothing." Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Edmund would be proud of you." He reached for his briefcase. "I need to consider this carefully, but you should know there are others who might stand with you. Patricia Winters and Michael Chen, for starters. They've expressed concerns similar to yours." Patricia and Michael were newer board members, respected industry veterans who had joined after my grandfather's passing. Their support would be invaluable. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I appreciate your discretion in this matter." As we parted ways, Daniel placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Charlotte. Your father didn't build an empire by playing fair." His warning followed me back to the office, where I found an unusual scene unfolding. James Caldwell, my soon-to-be supervisor, was already there, touring my department, introducing himself to my team members. My father hadn't wasted any time. James spotted me and flashed a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Charlotte, there you are. I was just getting acquainted with everyone." My team watched the exchange nervously, their faces reflecting confusion and concern. Many had worked under my leadership for years, trusted my guidance, thrived in the supportive environment I'd cultivated despite my father's cutthroat corporate culture. "James," I nodded professionally, "this is unexpected. I thought you weren't starting until Monday." "Your father suggested I get a head start," he replied smoothly. "We're having lunch today to discuss the transition. You're welcome to join us." The invitation was clearly performative, meant to emphasize my demotion in front of my team. I smiled politely. "Unfortunately, I have client meetings scheduled. I'm sure you two have plenty to discuss without me." I walked to my office, feeling their eyes on my back, hearing the whispers that would inevitably follow. Inside, with the door closed, I allowed myself 10 seconds of pure, uncensored rage. Hands clenched, jaw tight, breath held. Then I exhaled slowly, straightened my posture, and turned on my computer. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and reports, each interaction tinged with the unspoken knowledge that my position was changing. Some colleagues were awkwardly sympathetic, others barely concealed their schadenfreude. Corporate politics at its finest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During my lunch break, I slipped away to meet with my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, in a small conference room 6 blocks from the office. She greeted me with a firm handshake and immediately got down to business, spreading documents across the table. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "The share transfers from your grandfather were meticulously executed. Your majority ownership is legally sound." "But," I prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. Sarah sighed. "But your father has significant resources and connections. He could challenge the transfers, claim undue influence, tie this up in court for years." She looked at me directly. "Are you prepared for that kind of battle?" I thought of the morning's events, of James Caldwell's smug face, of my team's confused expressions. More prepared every day. "Then let's go through the plan again." For the next hour, we refined our strategy: when to reveal my ownership, how to approach the board, what legal countermeasures to prepare for when my father inevitably fought back. Sarah was thorough, identifying potential pitfalls and suggesting alternatives. "One more thing," she said as we wrapped up. "You should be prepared for this to get personal. Your father doesn't strike me as someone who separates business from family." I almost laughed. There's never been a separation. To my father, I've always been just another asset to control or liability to manage. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "All the more reason to protect yourself on all fronts." I returned to the office to find an email from my father, summoning me to a meeting with the executive team at 4 o'clock. The subject line read simply, "Transition Planning." My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Heard about Caldwell showing up today. You okay? Fine, I texted back. But I could use your help. Can you get me the real numbers on the Southeast Asian facilities? The ones from the independent audit, not the sanitized version. Already on it, she replied. Dinner tonight? We should talk. My place, 7 p.m., I confirmed. The executive meeting was exactly what I'd expected. A public execution disguised as a corporate restructuring. My father stood at the head of the conference table, outlining the exciting changes coming to my department, while James Caldwell nodded enthusiastically beside him. I sat quietly, maintaining a neutral expression as my responsibilities were stripped away one by one. Charlotte will be transitioning to an advisory role, my father announced, not quite meeting my eyes. Her institutional knowledge will be valuable as James implements his vision for the division. Translation: I was being sidelined but kept around long enough to transfer all my knowledge and client relationships to James before being pushed out entirely. It was a common corporate tactic, one I'd seen my father employ many times with executives who fell out of favor. Do you have any questions or thoughts, Charlotte? My father asked, a challenge in his voice. The room turned to me, some faces sympathetic, others curious to see if I would finally break. I smiled professionally. I look forward to ensuring a smooth transition. The success of the company remains my priority. Disappointment flashed across my father's face. He'd wanted drama, tears, an emotional outburst he could point to as further evidence of my unsuitability for leadership. Instead, he got measured professionalism, and it clearly frustrated him. The meeting concluded with handshakes and false congratulations to James. As people filtered out, my father beckoned me to stay behind. That's it, he demanded once we were alone. No fight at all, I regarded him calmly. What would be the point? You've made your decision. He studied me suspiciously. This isn't like you, you're planning something. I'm accepting reality, I replied. Isn't that what you've always wanted? For me to accept my limitations? He frowned, unsettled by my composure. Just make sure you give James everything he needs. All client information, all strategic plans. Everything. Of course. I agreed smoothly. Complete transparency. He narrowed his eyes, still trying to read me, then waved his hand in dismissal. As I turned to leave, he added, Your grandfather would be disappointed, you know. He had such high hopes for you in this company. The comment was designed to wound, to pierce the armor of my composure. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. We'll never know, will we? Then I walked out, leaving him to wonder at the ambiguity of my response. By the time I left the office that evening, the news of my effective demotion had spread throughout the company. Colleagues avoided eye contact in the elevator. The security guard offered a sympathetic smile as I passed through the lobby. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching rain. I walked the 12 blocks to my apartment, using the time to clear my head and refine my next steps. The confrontation was coming sooner than I'd planned, accelerated by my father's move to replace me. I would need to act decisively now. Megan arrived at 7 o'clock precisely, bearing takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a USB drive containing the files I'd requested. We set up dinner on my kitchen island, and she immediately launched into an update on the office gossip. Everyone's talking, she said, opening containers of pad thai and green curry. Most people think it's unfair, especially after how you turned that department around. The Singapore deal alone should have earned you a promotion, not whatever this is. I smiled slightly. Office sympathy won't change anything. No, but office loyalty might. She leaned forward. Your team is upset, Charlotte. They don't want to work for Caldwell. Allison and Marcus are already updating their resumes. Allison and Marcus were two of my most talented analysts. Their departure would be a significant loss to the department. Tell them to hold off, I said carefully. Things might be changing sooner than anyone expects. Megan paused, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. What are you planning? I considered how much to reveal. Megan was loyal, but the fewer people who knew the full extent of my strategy, the better. Let's just say I'm not as powerless as my father believes. About that, she said, reaching for the USB drive. You asked for the real audit numbers. It's worse than we thought. She pulled up the files on my laptop, revealing damning evidence of labor violations, environmental hazards, and deliberately falsified compliance reports at the Southeast Asian manufacturing facilities. My father's pride and joy, the centerpiece of his cost-cutting strategy. He's built a house of cards, I murmured, scrolling through the documents. If regulators saw these, they'd shut down operations immediately, Megan finished. The company would face millions in fines, not to mention the PR disaster. Does the board know? They've seen the sanitized version. Only your father and the facility managers have access to the real numbers. I sat back, processing this new information. This changes things. How? Megan asked. I was planning to challenge my father's leadership based on strategic disagreements and his management style. But this. I gestured to the screen. This is concrete evidence of mismanagement that puts the entire company at risk. Megan watched me carefully. Whatever you're planning, I want to help. Your father has gone too far for too long. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand gratefully. I'll need allies when the time comes. For now, keep gathering information, but be careful. If my father suspects anything... I know, she nodded. I'll be discreet. After Megan left, I stayed up late into the night, reviewing the audit documents and revising my strategy. The evidence of my father's unethical practices provided leverage I hadn't anticipated, but using it required careful consideration. Exposing these violations publicly could damage the company irreparably, hurting thousands of employees in the process. My goal wasn't to destroy Reeves Enterprises. It was to transform it. By midnight, I had formulated a new plan. I emailed Daniel Harrington, requesting an urgent meeting with him and the two board members he'd mentioned, Patricia Winters and Michael Chen. Then I contacted Sarah, my lawyer, updating her on the new developments. I fell asleep just after 2 a.m., surrounded by documents and strategy notes, dreaming of boardrooms and battles yet to come. The next day passed in a strange limbo. I attended meetings, responded to emails, and began the process of transitioning information to James Caldwell, all while knowing that the company's power structure was about to undergo a seismic shift. James mistook my cooperation for resignation, growing increasingly condescending as the day progressed. "Don't worry," he said during our afternoon briefing, patting my hand in a gesture so patronizing I had to resist the urge to break his fingers. "We'll find a role that suits your capabilities." I smiled thinly. "I'm sure you will." That evening, I met with Daniel, Patricia, and Michael at Daniel's home in Beacon Hill. Neutral territory, away from corporate eyes. Patricia Winters was a formidable woman in her 60s, with a reputation for ethical leadership at her previous company. Michael Chen was younger, tech-savvy, with progressive ideas about corporate responsibility that had often put him at odds with my father during board meetings. They listened in stunned silence as I presented the evidence of violations at the overseas facilities, followed by the revelation of my majority ownership. "You've controlled the company all this time?" Michael asked incredulously. "Why wait until now to act?" "I wanted to prove myself on merit, not ownership," I explained. "And I needed to understand exactly what I'd be taking on. The company's problems run deeper than my father's leadership style." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "Your approach shows maturity. Many would have wielded that power immediately, without consideration for the consequences." "My grandfather trusted me with this responsibility," I said simply. "I won't dishonor that by acting rashly." Daniel leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A special board meeting, called under the authority granted to majority shareholders. We present the evidence of mismanagement, along with a comprehensive plan to address the violations, while minimizing damage to the company. Then we vote to remove my father as CEO." "He won't go quietly," Michael warned. "No," I agreed. "He won't. That's why I need your support, not just in the vote, but in the aftermath. This transition needs to be as stable as possible for the sake of the employees and shareholders." The three board members exchanged glances. Then Patricia spoke decisively. "I'm in. Your grandfather was a visionary who built this company on principles your father has abandoned. It's time to restore that legacy. Michael and Daniel nodded their agreement. We should move quickly, Daniel advised. Before your father has time to undermine your position further. I've already instructed my lawyer to prepare the necessary documents, I confirmed. The meeting can be called for Monday morning. Quote, as I left Daniel's house, the weight of what I was about to do settled fully on my shoulders. In less than 4 days, I would directly challenge the man who had spent my entire life making me feel insignificant. The man who, despite everything, was still my father. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I met with Sarah to finalize the legal strategy, consulted with financial advisors about potential market reactions, and drafted a comprehensive plan to address the overseas violations without triggering a company-wide crisis. Throughout it all, I maintained a facade of normalcy, grocery shopping on Saturday, a run along the Charles River on Sunday morning, even a brief call with my father about an upcoming client presentation. He seemed distracted, irritable, but no more so than usual. He had no idea what was coming. Sunday night, I stood at my apartment window watching the city lights, feeling oddly calm. Tomorrow would change everything, yet the uncertainty didn't frighten me. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I was acting fully on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Everything ready for tomorrow? As ready as it can be, I replied. He doesn't suspect anything, she assured me. Spent all weekend golfing with Caldwell, planning your department's future. I smiled at the irony. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be intense. You too, she texted back. And Charlotte? I'm proud of you. The simple words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How long had it been since anyone had expressed pride in me? My father certainly never had. Not even when I'd secured the Singapore contract that had saved the company millions. I set my phone aside and prepared for bed, laying out my clothes for the next day. A charcoal suit, crisp white blouse, and the diamond earrings my mother had left me. Battle armor of a different kind. As I drifted towards sleep, I recalled something my grandfather had told me years ago, during one of our weekend chess games. The most powerful piece on the board often goes unnoticed until it's too late, he'd said, moving his queen into position for checkmate. Remember that, Charlotte. Tomorrow my father would finally understand exactly what he had failed to see. Monday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed at odds with the storm I was about to unleash. I dressed methodically, each movement deliberate as I prepared for the most important confrontation of my life. The diamond earrings caught the light as I fastened them, my mother's silent presence with me in this moment of reckoning. I arrived at REEVES Enterprises an hour earlier than usual. The lobby was quiet, the security guard offering a friendly nod as I made my way to the executive floor. My office was exactly as I'd left it Friday evening. Organized, pristine, ready for the transition I'd been planning, though not the one my father anticipated. While the building slowly came to life around me, I reviewed my notes one final time. The documentation of labor violations and environmental hazards. The legal paperwork confirming my majority ownership. The comprehensive plan for addressing these issues without destabilizing the company. Everything was in order. At 8:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. In the lobby, Patricia and Michael just arrived as well. Come up, I replied. We'll meet in the executive conference room. By 8:30, our small coalition had assembled. Daniel Harrington arrived last, his expression grave but determined. Your father just pulled into the parking garage, he informed me. Are you ready for this, Charlotte? I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I've been ready for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah distributed copies of the key documents as we took our seats around the conference table. Not in our usual positions, but with me at the head where my father typically sat. A symbolic gesture, but an important one. At precisely 8:45, Victor Reeves strode into the conference room, his confident smile faltering slightly as he registered the unexpected gathering. Behind him, James Caldwell hovered uncertainly, clearly confused by the unscheduled meeting. "What's this?" my father demanded, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on me in his chair. His eyes narrowed. "Charlotte, what are you doing?" I met his gaze steadily. "Please take a seat, Dad. We have important matters to discuss." His face darkened at my tone, but before he could respond, Daniel spoke up. "Victor, this is a special board meeting called by majority shareholders under Article 7 of the company bylaws." Majority shareholders? My father's confusion was genuine. "What are you talking about?" "I hold controlling interest in this company." "Actually, you don't," I said calmly, sliding a document across the table toward him. "I do." The room fell silent as my father snatched up the paper, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then rage as he scanned its contents. "This is impossible," he sputtered. "A forgery, some kind of trick." "It's completely legitimate," Sarah interjected professionally. "Ms. Reeves inherited these shares from Edmund Reeves through a series of legal transfers beginning 5 years ago. The documentation has been verified by 3 independent legal firms." My father's gaze shot to me, his eyes burning with betrayal and fury. "You've been planning this? All this time?" "Not exactly," I replied evenly. "Grandfather made this arrangement without my knowledge. I only learned of it after his death." "And you kept it secret for 3 years?" His voice rose incredulously. "My own daughter?" "Yes," I acknowledged. "I wanted to earn my place here on merit, not ownership. I wanted to understand the company fully before making any decisions about its future." I paused, holding his gaze. "And I wanted to give you every opportunity to see my value without being forced to acknowledge it." James Caldwell, still standing awkwardly near the door, cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should leave you to—" "Stay," my father barked, his control slipping. Then, to me, "This changes nothing. The board's still—" "The board," Patricia Winters interrupted firmly, "is very concerned about certain matters that have recently come to light." She nodded toward the folders in front of each board member, particularly regarding our Southeast Asian operations. My father paled slightly as he registered the nature of the documents being reviewed. His gaze darted around the table, assessing who knew what, calculating his next move with the tactical precision that had built his empire. "These are internal company documents," he said carefully. "Preliminary assessments that don't reflect the full picture. They're accurate audit reports that you deliberately concealed from the board," Michael Chen countered, his tone sharp. "Reports showing systematic labor violations, environmental hazards, and falsified compliance documentation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. My father's composure began to crack. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped. "A coordinated attack orchestrated by my daughter because she couldn't handle a simple corporate restructuring. This has nothing to do with my position," I said calmly. "This is about the future of Reeves Enterprises and the thousands of people who depend on it." "Don't pretend this is about the company," he snarled. "This is personal. You've never had what it takes to succeed here, so you're resorting to underhanded tactics instead of earning your place." I absorbed the familiar accusations without flinching. They no longer had power over me. "The board will vote on 2 resolutions today," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "First, to implement immediate corrective actions at all overseas facilities to address the violations documented in these reports. Second, to remove Victor Reeves as CEO, effective immediately." The color drained from my father's face. "You can't do this." "As majority shareholder, she absolutely can," Sarah confirmed. "And based on these documents alone, she has more than sufficient cause." My father turned to the board members, his expression shifting to one of appeal. "We've worked together for years. You know what I've built here. Are you really going to let her destroy it over some administrative oversights?" "Administrative oversights?" Patricia repeated incredulously. "Victor, there are children working 12-hour shifts in these facilities. Safety equipment that exists only on paper. Environmental toxins being dumped into local water supplies. These aren't oversights. They're deliberate violations that put this entire company at risk. Not to mention the people being harmed, Michael added pointedly. My father's desperation grew visible. We can address these issues, he insisted. Make whatever changes are necessary. But removing me now would destabilize the company, alarm the shareholders. We've prepared a comprehensive transition plan, I interjected, sliding another document toward him, including a strategy for addressing the violations without triggering external investigations, a communication plan for shareholders, and a timeline for implementing necessary changes. He glanced at the document but didn't pick it up. Instead, his gaze fixed on me with a new intensity. So this is your revenge. For what? Not giving you the validation you craved? Pointing out your weaknesses? Trying to make you stronger? I met his gaze without wavering. This isn't revenge, Dad. It's accountability. For the company, and for you. And who will lead Reeves Enterprises after this coup, he demanded. You? The girl who needed her grandfather's secret intervention because she couldn't succeed on her own merits? The barb was designed to wound, to undermine my confidence in front of the board. In the past, it might have worked. But not today. Yes, I replied simply. I will serve as interim CEO, while the board conducts a proper search for a permanent replacement, which may include me as a candidate if my performance warrants consideration. My father looked genuinely shocked. He had expected me to claim the throne, to make this about my ambition. My measured approach had caught him off guard. Board members, I continued, turning away from my father's stunned expression. You've reviewed the documentation and the proposed resolutions. Are there any questions before we proceed to a vote? The room fell silent. My father remained standing, his hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. In his eyes I could see him calculating, searching for a way out, a counterattack, any option to maintain control. This isn't over, Charlotte, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You've made an enemy today. I built this company from nothing. It's mine. And I'll fight you with everything I have. I nodded, acknowledging his declaration of war without accepting its premise. The company was never yours alone, Dad. Grandfather founded it, employees built it, clients sustain it, and now I'll help guide it toward a better future. I turned back to the board. Shall we proceed with the vote? The formal proceedings took less than 20 minutes. The resolutions passed unanimously, with my father refusing to participate in what he termed this farce of corporate governance. James Caldwell had slipped out quietly after the implications became clear, no doubt already updating his resume. When the votes were recorded and the meeting officially adjourned, my father remained, staring at me with a mixture of fury and something that might have been reluctant admiration. You played this perfectly, he said quietly, as the others began to file out. Waited until I made myself vulnerable, built your alliances carefully, used my own techniques against me. His laugh was hollow. Maybe you are my daughter after all. I've always been your daughter, I replied. You just never saw me clearly. He shook his head. You've won the battle, Charlotte, but this war is just beginning. When the markets react, when clients get nervous, when the complexity of running this company becomes real, then we'll see if you have what it takes. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But unlike you, I don't have to do it alone. I've built relationships, not just power structures. Something flickered in his eyes, hurt perhaps, or recognition. Then his expression hardened once more. Security will escort me out, I presume? A final humiliation? That won't be necessary, I replied. You have until the end of the week to clear out your office. I expect a full handover of all executive files and access codes by Wednesday. He nodded stiffly, then gathered his coat and briefcase. At the door, he paused and turned back. He always favored you, you know. My father. Even when I was building this company, taking the risks, making the hard decisions, he was always watching you, waiting. As if he knew something about you that I couldn't see. With that, he walked out, leaving me alone in the conference room that had witnessed my transformation from worthless daughter to company leader in the span of a single hour. The reality of what I'd just done washed over me in waves. I had effectively declared war on my own father, taken control of a multinational corporation, and committed to addressing systemic violations that would require massive resources and restructuring. The weight of these responsibilities should have been crushing. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Daniel returned to the conference room, interrupting my thoughts. Charlotte, the executive team is gathering in the main boardroom. They've heard rumors, but they need to hear from you directly about what's happening. I nodded, gathering my documents. What about my father? He left the building. Patricia is with legal, preparing the formal announcement to shareholders. Michael is speaking with our PR team about the media strategy. He hesitated. Are you ready for this? Once you step into that boardroom as CEO, everything changes. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to prove myself worthy of my father's respect. All the times I'd bitten back my true thoughts to maintain peace. All the innovative ideas I'd had that were dismissed or appropriated. I thought about my grandfather's quiet confidence in me, expressed not through words but through the extraordinary trust he'd placed in my judgment. I've been ready for longer than I knew, I replied, straightening my shoulders. The executive boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to concern to barely concealed anticipation. These were the company's senior leaders, people who had worked under my father for years, who had witnessed his management style, and in many cases perpetuated it. Good morning, I began, taking my place at the head of the table. As of 30 minutes ago, I have been appointed interim CEO of REEVES Enterprises by a unanimous vote of the board. My father is stepping down, effective immediately. The shock rippled visibly around the table. Martin Graves, the CFO who had been my father's right-hand man for over a decade, was the first to speak. On what grounds? Multiple violations at our overseas facilities that posed significant legal and financial risk to the company. I replied calmly, violations that were deliberately concealed from the board and shareholders. Murmurs spread through the room. Janet Foster, our head of compliance, paled visibly. She had likely been aware of at least some of these issues. What happens now? Asked Robert Simmons, our veteran head of sales. Now we fix what's broken, I said simply. Starting with our overseas operations, there will be significant changes in how we approach compliance, labor practices, and environmental standards. These changes will impact our margins in the short term, but strengthen our position long term. I looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze directly. I understand this is sudden and unsettling. Each of you has contributed significantly to this company's success, and I value that expertise. But I also expect complete transparency and ethical leadership moving forward. Anyone uncomfortable with that direction should speak with me privately this week. The message was clear. Get on board with the new approach or prepare to leave. I wouldn't force anyone out immediately. That would create too much instability. But I needed to establish expectations from day one. I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next few days. I continued. In the meantime, please continue your regular operations and direct any press inquiries to our communications team. They'll be issuing a formal statement within the hour. As the meeting concluded, I noticed the varied reactions around the table. Some executives seemed relieved, others wary, a few openly hostile. Transforming this culture wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen. Megan was waiting outside the boardroom, her eyes wide with excitement and disbelief. It actually happened, she whispered as executives filed past us. You did it. We're just getting started, I replied quietly. The hard part comes next. The remainder of that day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategic planning sessions. News of the leadership change spread through the company like wildfire, generating speculation and uncertainty at every level. I addressed the entire staff via email, providing as much transparency as possible while acknowledging that changes would be coming. By late afternoon, I finally had a moment alone in what was now my office, my father's former domain, with its imposing desk and wall of accolades. I stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline as the setting sun cast long shadows between buildings. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. One era ending, another beginning in this very same space. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Sarah, my lawyer, entered with a file folder. The press release went out an hour ago. Stock is down slightly, but holding steady. Better than we anticipated. And my father? No public statement yet. But our sources say he's already meeting with attorneys. She hesitated. This won't be an easy transition, Charlotte. He knows this company inside and out, has allies everywhere. The battle is just beginning. I nodded, accepting this reality. We're prepared for that. Are you? She asked carefully. He's still your father. The question gave me pause. Despite everything, despite the years of criticism and undermining, despite being called worthless in front of others, there was still a part of me that remembered riding on his shoulders as a child, the rare moments when his approval had filled me with pride. The man who built this company deserves respect for what he accomplished, I said finally. But the man who compromised its values and endangered its future needed to be stopped. I can hold both those truths at once. Sarah nodded, satisfied with my answer. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow will be another long day. After she left, I began the process of making this space my own. I didn't remove my father's awards. They were part of the company's history, but I rearranged them, making room for new visions. I placed my mother's photograph on the desk, along with a small chess piece, a queen that had been a gift from my grandfather. As I worked, I thought about the journey ahead. The immediate challenges were daunting, addressing the overseas violations without triggering external investigations, reassuring nervous shareholders and clients, establishing my leadership with a team accustomed to my father's style. But beyond those tactical concerns lay the real work, transforming Reeves Enterprises into the company it could be, should be, ethical, innovative, and human-centered. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. You were magnificent today. Your grandfather would be proud. The simple message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In all the years of striving for my father's approval, I'd sometimes forgotten that I'd already had my grandfather's faith. Quiet, unwavering, and ultimately more powerful. By the time I left the office that night, most of the staff had gone home. The building was quiet, the executive floor dimly lit. As I walked past my father's, now my office, I noticed that he had returned at some point and removed a few personal items. His golf trophies were gone, as was the vintage scotch he kept in the cabinet. Small surrenders in what would likely be a prolonged conflict. Outside, the night air was cool and bracing. I decided to walk home, using the time to process everything that had happened. The city moved around me, people hurrying home, lights changing, life continuing. It struck me that most of these strangers had no idea that today had been the most momentous day of my life, the day I'd finally stood up not just to my father but to the voice inside that had absorbed his judgments for so long. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at our annual company conference, addressing over 1,000 employees gathered to hear about our new direction. Behind me, screens displayed our updated corporate values and the tangible results of our transformation so far. When I became CEO, I promised transparency, accountability, and a commitment to ethical practices at every level of our operations. Today, I'm proud to report that we've not only addressed the compliance issues at our overseas facilities, but we've established new industry-leading standards for labor practices and environmental stewardship. The data points were compelling. Employee satisfaction up 27%, retention improved across all departments, and despite initial concerns, our stock price had stabilized and was now trending upward as the markets recognized the long-term value of our approach. We've faced challenges, I continued honestly. Some of our most profitable practices were also our most problematic. Making those changes required sacrifice and adjustment. But by doing so, we've built something more sustainable, more resilient, and ultimately more valuable. I didn't mention my father by name. There was no need to. His legal challenges to my leadership had faded after the initial evidence came to light. though our personal relationship remained fractured. Last I'd heard, he was consulting for a competitor, no doubt telling himself he would rebuild and someday reclaim what he'd lost. The true measure of leadership isn't how much power you accumulate, I told the attentive audience, but how you use that power to elevate others. Each of you has contributed to this transformation, bringing your insights, your dedication, and your humanity to work every day. From the front row, Megan, now our chief of staff, smiled encouragingly. Beside her sat Daniel, Patricia, and Michael, the board members who had taken a chance on my vision when it mattered most. Someone once called me worthless, I said, my voice steady, implied that I would never have what it takes to lead. That judgment didn't define me, but it did motivate me to define myself, to demonstrate that different leadership styles can create different kinds of success. The room was silent, attentive. Many knew pieces of my story, though few knew it all. Whatever voices have tried to limit you, whether external critics or your own self-doubt, I want you to know this. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see your value. It's revealed through your persistence, your integrity, and your courage to stand for something larger than yourself. The applause that followed wasn't just for me, I realized. It was for all of us who had been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. All of us who had found the strength to prove those judgments wrong, not through vengeance, but through vision. As I stepped away from the podium, I caught sight of an unexpected figure at the back of the hall. My father, standing alone, watching, our eyes met briefly across the distance. He didn't smile or nod, but he didn't look away either. In that moment of silent acknowledgement, something shifted between us. Not reconciliation, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a different kind of understanding. I had spent so many years trying to prove my worth to him. Now I had finally proven it to myself, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.